Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you're here live, if you're watching the replay, welcome. Today, we are going to be talking about why listening is actually a hidden superpower for most people that learn and understand how to do it right. And it might just be the missing piece to you being more charismatic as a leader. So, I'm going to give just a minute for people to trickle in. Let me know where you are tuning in from, making sure that everything is working well. And we're going to jump right into things today. So, my name is Dr. Christina Ady. I am a social psychologist, and now I work with leaders who are aspiring for executive positions to strategically improve their leadership mindset as well as their communication skills when it comes to working with their team, with their clients, and with their management. So, let's get into why listening is something that's so underrated, but actually everyone needs to improve a little more than they would care to admit. Now, hear me out for a second before I jump into the training itself. I am going to encourage you to give this a wholehearted listen. If you feel like, you know what, I've heard this before, listening doesn't seem like a big deal, catch yourself in that moment. I've already heard this, or I already know, is one of the worst mindsets that you can have in general because it automatically shuts you down and prevents you from learning, from improving, and from consuming the same information in a different way. You see, fundamentally, there's a difference between knowing and implementing. So just because you know something in the sense that theoretically you've heard it before, doesn't mean that you are implementing it the way that you should. And it also doesn't mean that you're implementing it in a way that can't be improved. Sometimes hearing the same thing from someone else in a different context is all you need to make it click. Because just because you've heard it before doesn't mean you haven't grown and evolved as well. All right. So, for the rest of this training, if you feel like I've heard this before, just stay with me, hear it out, and really catch yourself. And again, ask yourself, am I implementing what I've heard? All right. So, why is listening such a hidden superpower? Well, think about it this way. We are taught to communicate from an extremely early age, right? One or two for most of us. We're never actually formally taught how to listen. We just imitate what we learn from the people around us. So we observe the way that our parents listen, we observe the way that our early teachers, bosses, colleagues listen, and we mimic that. And so take a moment to really reflect on how often you give someone your full attention in your everyday life, whether that's your kids, your partner, your colleague. And be honest with yourself here. How often are you stopping and scrolling on your phone, maybe multitasking, doing something else? How often are you perhaps listening, but not even physically engaged with the person that you're listening to? You see, listening is a full body experience. We'll put it that way. It's not just about hearing the words that are being said, it's about mentally attuning to the message that is being said, as well as having the courtesy and the understanding of how to pick up on the things that are not being said, like through facial expressions, through body language, through hesitation, through changes in someone's vocals, as an example. But it's also giving them your experience. So if you were talking to me and I was faced this way, mhm, but physically away from you, that would not give you the impression that I'm listening to you at all. Okay. So, really, before we even get into the meat and potatoes here, I want you to have this deep understanding that listening seems like something so, so minor. It seems like something that we do every day, but it's something that is such a crucial fundamental building block to every single relationship and interaction that you have in your life. So, for context, today I'm going to focus on more of like a corporate experience, leaderships, clients, teams. Think of it as like a work context. But you could take the exact same thing that I'm teaching you today and apply it to your personal relationships, your romantic relationships, even things like parenting your kids. It's all applicable. So, when you think about someone who is charismatic, when you think about someone who just has some sort of magnetism about them, sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint what that is. There's lots of books and research and things out there to suggest that there's a bunch of little qualities that add up to make someone seem confident, to make someone charismatic, to make someone seem like a better leader or better listener than someone else. And again, it's such a small thing, but it matters to us. So when you think about psychology, there's ample research out there to suggest that people pick up on small things about us, the way that we look, the way that we sound, how we carry ourselves. That's why there's research to suggest that things like pretty privilege or asshole tax, they're very real. And it's one of those things where you may superficially on the surface say, well, who cares if I'm listening? Who cares if I'm fully engaged or not? I'm getting my work done, or I'm skilled at what I do, or I know this, I've heard this before. And yet, the impression that you're making is making a difference. Whether you choose to believe that or not is not the point. Fundamentally, fact based research shows how you act and how you carry yourself makes an impression on others. And the impression that you make changes the types of outcomes that you receive. Okay? So, again, people pay attention to the minor details, but for us, it's very, very easy to overlook them because we have a million and two other things going on. Now, when it comes to listening, a lot of people focus on the sort of external fact of listening, like showing that you're listening, making the right facial expressions, nodding your head the right way. But listening comes down to, like most things, an internal component and an external component. Okay. So it's such an important thing to understand because externally, when you are listening, you are showing someone that you are giving them your attention. That leads to you actually having a conversation with someone. So if you're a leader and a team member comes to you with a question, and you actually take the time to listen, to understand the question, to give them an appropriate answer, to guide them through to getting to the answer on their own, can you see how that will make a completely different outcome than your team member coming to you, you giving them half your attention, them leaving confused, right? The implications of that on work quality, productivity, time lost, revenue lost, all of these external repercussions of someone being confused and not able to do their job because they couldn't have a conversation with you that led to clarity because you couldn't listen fundamentally. It's all interconnected. That's the external. But the internal needs to be acknowledged as well. This is things like the frustration that someone feels when you're not listening, the frustration that they may feel when they have a conversation with you and they walk away feeling just as confused as before. But maybe now, on top of that, they also feel disrespected, or maybe they feel dismissed, or maybe they feel like they're not a priority when they should be. Right or wrong, you may have a completely different perspective on this, but how they feel is valid to them. And how they feel will always determine the quality of their outcomes and the types of actions they choose to make. So if you are not giving someone your full attention, you're leaving them feeling dismissed. They walk away from the conversation feeling frustrated, lacking motivation. That decreases their productivity, that increases their frustration, that increases their lack of satisfaction with the job, with the company culture. Can you start to see how the repercussions add up and they build up when it starts with something as simple as listening that we all do also well, right? So again, keep in mind, there's a practical sort of outcome-based aspect to good listening, and then there's an internal aspect to listening as well of how you make someone feel. Okay. And I have a whole other video previously that I can link for anyone who needs it, all about how the way that you feel will always shape the way that you choose to act, the way that you choose to behave, and the types of outcomes that you get. So, what happens for many people is there's a difference between reacting and responding. Okay. So, when someone comes to you, for most people, the initial response that they have is a reaction. So, what is the difference? A reaction is the first thing that comes to mind that you say based on the types of emotional, reactions, but the emotional state that you get into based on what the other person said. So if your team member's coming to you with a problem and you immediately feel frustrated that the problem is there, that it's not the first time the problem is there, that the team member didn't come to you with solutions in hand, that the team member did not implement a solution that they should have known, this initial reaction is what will lead you to say something in a way that may not be ideal. It may lead to micro expressions or even visible facial expressions of you being dissatisfied, maybe even on the verge of judgmental, which happens. Your body language may change. In most cases, your tone changes, and you may come across as harsh, as abrupt, as, I don't want to say mean, but, you know, along the lines of showing your dissatisfaction through your tone because of the initial emotional state that you're in to the situation. So that's reacting. Responding is when you take time to process what comes up to you, to process the thoughts that you have, and to then pick a path that is more ideal. So the team member comes to you, you might be frustrated. You might have the thought of like, well, they should have known this already. This is not the first time this has happened. Like, you should know what to do. But then you catch yourself and you say, okay, that's not the best way to respond right now. Placing blame won't help the situation. Why don't I ask them some questions? Why don't I ask them open-ended questions and see what their thought process is so that I can actually help them get to the solution and use it as a teaching moment so that they don't make the same mistake again. And so that space, that gap, that pause, not only is a sign of emotional intelligence, but it is the difference. It's that little difference that completely changes the nature of your conversations, the way that you feel, and the way that the other person feels, which again has repercussions at every level. Okay. So that's the biggest difference. So this week or next week, because it's Friday, I'd really like you to challenge yourself to consider whether you are reacting or responding in conversations. And the best way to notice this is when someone talks to you, just pay attention. Are you saying quite literally the first thing that you think, the first thought that you have, the first strong emotion that comes up? Are you acting on it? Are you saying it? Because then you're reacting. Or are you letting your wheels turn a little bit? And then are you sort of processing what your options are and picking the one that you think is best? Because then that's responding. And so understanding where you're starting from is so crucial for you to then be able to improve your listening skills. Because it's really hard to improve the way that you listen if you don't even recognize the fact that you're reacting constantly. Okay. So let's talk about this for a minute. Why do so many people get into a state of reacting? All right. And this is sort of the hidden aspect, the hidden psychological aspect of active listening that just isn't talked about nearly enough. Okay. And this is coming from a social psychologist. So the reason why so many people end up being reactive is number one, they have not done the inner work, as is so popular right now. They have not done the work to recognize what their triggers and their biases are. And number two, they have not done the work to regulate their nervous system so that they're in that state of stress and, anxiety and all the feelings that come with that. So the first part, not understanding what your triggers are, not understanding what your biases are, will constantly lead you to being reactive. Okay. This is why it's becoming more and more common to hear people talk about like, this triggered me. Like I was so triggered by this. Like if you've ever wondered what that means, like I'm so triggered, it's really fundamentally the concept of someone else doing or saying something that creates a strong emotional reaction in you. It could be emotional in the sense of quite literally you get angry, you get frustrated, you might get upset, you might want to shut down. But it can also create a physiological reaction in the sense of you may feel like shakes or jitters. You may feel your heart start racing. You may feel your blood start boiling. You may start to tune them out as if quite literally, but like the hearing might decrease because you go internally. Those are all signs of being triggered in the sense that there is something within your own psychology that is not reacting well to this topic, to this statement, to the thing that the other person said or did. Okay? If you are constantly in a state of trying to navigate your own emotional reaction, and again, that could be emotional or physiological, can you see how that will fundamentally make it so much harder to pay attention to what the other person is saying, to dig deeper into why they're saying this, and to respond rather than react? So when you are full of unprocessed triggers, we'll call them, they will constantly be coming up, and you will constantly be feeling a state of that, like, I'm blanking on the word, the state of stress, right? The fight or flight. And so depending on the situation and depending on what you feel like the expectations are for you, whether you can fight or flight, that's where you will see yourself either getting angry, getting frustrated, taking your anger out on the other person and feeling justified for it, or shutting down, not wanting to engage in the conversation, postponing it, ending it as quickly as possible, quite literally shutting down and missing what was said. Okay. If you've ever had that moment where someone's talking to you and you're like, what are they saying? I'm looking at you. I'm hearing words, but it's just like a bzzz going out. That's you shutting down and being unable to process what is being said. Okay. So this is the hidden key in your psychology that is stopping you from listening. It's not understanding what your biases and triggers are. So when you can take the time to, first of all, even understand what types of situations are leading to that, that is when you start to understand how to go from a state of stress and reaction to a state of responding. And again, the implications of that are so major, right? I want you to think about yourself. So even if you're a leader or an aspiring leader, forget that aspect for a second. Think back to at least one time in your life where you were talking to someone else and they just completely misunderstood what you were saying. They twisted your words. They used them against you. They got mad at you for something that seemed like such a minor thing for you. Or maybe you came with good intentions and you just needed some support. And instead you left the conversation thinking like, why did I even bring this up? They're mad at me and I didn't do anything, right? That's because the other person. Okay. Sorry, it's showing me that I'm not live. Oh, okay. I think I'm back. Sorry, everyone. Okay, I think I'm back. Okay, so yes. So if you've ever had that situation where you encountered that with someone else, they were taking out their unprocessed triggers on you. Okay, and that's not a good feeling. So think back to that time again. Did you want to have a conversation with them again? Next time something similar needed to be talked about, were you hesitant to bring it up? Did you feel like you had to walk on eggshells around them? Now put yourself into the shoes of being that person who's, blaming people, who's angry at people, who's taking things out of context. Do you feel like that would make you a good leader? Do you feel like that would make you in the lineup for a promotion? Do you feel like that will leave a good impression? Do you feel like that will make people want to be part of your team, leave you raving reviews, love working with you and the team culture that you create? I'll leave that one for you all to decide on your own. But again, listening seems like such a small thing to us because we feel like we're listening all day long to so many things. But on the other end, it is something that is so major that completely changes the nature of relationships, especially if it's repetitive over and over and over. And you don't want your team feeling like they're walking on eggshells around you. Because then again, think about the implications. If your team is too scared to bring something up to you and they let it fester and they let it linger, how much time is going to be lost? How much less productive is your team going to be? What's the potential revenue loss you're going to experience by just not fixing the mistake that could have been fixed if you had created a safe enough space to be able to have a conversation without reacting? The implications are major, but they seem minor. Okay, I'm going to keep hammering that home for everyone. So, how does understanding this make you more charismatic and make you a better leader? Right? So, first thing you're going to do, and again, start with your personal conversations, because it might actually be easier to catch yourself in those moments. When it comes to work, many people have a distinction in their mind where they've almost compartmentalized the personal relationships versus their work relationships, or the way that they show up in their personal relationships versus the way that they show up at work with their team as the leader that they think they need to be or that they are. Okay. Compartmentalized identity. Sometimes it's easy to justify the way that we are acting, especially if we're not ready to accept it. And because we compartmentalize our identities personally versus at work, it can be easier to catch yourself doing these things and reacting in your personal relationships. So, because it's Friday and the weekend's coming up, if you're not going to work over the weekend, pay attention to how you interact with your family members, your partner, your kids, maybe even people you meet outside, in the wild, in the coffee shop, in the grocery store, at the gas station. How often are you tuning out before someone has even finished speaking? How often are you a know-it-all, all due respect, who thinks they know the answer before the person has even finished speaking? How often are you already saying what you think the answer is to the statement that they haven't finished stating, right? Thank you, Free J. I appreciate that comment. So yes, so think about that. Take a moment to pay attention. And if you really want to deep dive into your active listening skills, I have a 3-part process that I teach that covers all these aspects. I'll leave a comment down below afterwards. But it's number 1, first and foremost, understanding your own psychology and understanding whether you are reacting or responding before you can even get to the nitty-gritty aspect of how to listen, how to hold your body language, what to do with your facial expressions, how to reflect, how to validate, how to understand the other person's facial expressions and body language. If you follow along, you'll quickly understand that active listening is not as easy as just nodding your head and saying the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay. Again, especially in the context of your team, there is so much that is constantly left unsaid that needs to be understood for you to understand the whole picture. And as a leader, when you're able to understand the whole picture, when you're able to understand the psychology of each of your team members, that's when you will start to see a massive difference in the quality of your team culture, in the productivity, in really every aspect of the team. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to just be here for a couple more minutes. Let me know. So in neurolinguistic programming, one of the heart of presupposition and communication is the meaning of communication is the response that it gets. This notion changed the way I engage with people. Awesome. Happy to hear that. If you happen to get a negative body language, it's a sign to change the approach of how we deliver the message. Did we react or respond? Yeah, that's a very good point. Usually it's on the delivery of our reaction response more than the content. Yeah, that's a very good point as well. So really, I think we can break that down even further into 2 components, right? The first is being able to understand your own reaction in the moment. So think of yourself, right? Especially as a leader, you should be able to relate to this concept. You are evaluating your team members and the quality of their work based on external objectives, right? Did they meet their goals? Did they meet their monthly goals? Was the project done on time, etc.? But often, either we don't want to or we choose not to. That's a whole other conversation. But often it's a lot harder to take that sort of approach to yourself and to evaluate objectively whether or not you're hitting your own standards. So I'm going to encourage you to do that over this weekend and over the next week. Take some time to really reflect on the types of conversations you're having and how you are showing up in them. So what does that look like? Have you listened to a person's thought process entirely before you responded? Did you take a moment to process what they said, consider the best response, and then give it? Or did you jump in with the first thing that came to mind? Did you face them, look at them, and give them your full attention? Or were you on your phone, finishing, scrolling online, or doing something else that gave the impression of not being fully engaged, right? Think about these objective standards of great active listening and just evaluate yourself on them. What you'll find is that overall, you will be at a certain level, right? You might be higher, you might be lower. Just be objective. But when you get into the nitty gritty, you will quickly understand that certain people, certain topics, and certain conversations drop your active listening significantly. And that's the clue to identifying where your reactive nature is coming from. So if any sort of perhaps troubleshooting issues are putting you into a state of stress immediately, that's a sign that there's something underlying there that needs to be dealt with around the concept more generally. If there's a specific person that is constantly putting you into a state of being reactive, well, then it's time to dive into why that specific person triggers you the way that they do. And again, this advice is high level and general specifically. So if you have questions about any of this, if this is resonating and you're recognizing the signs that you need support with this, just reach out to me after the fact. I'm happy to have a conversation around how we can help you, because again, this stuff matters. This is the deal breaker, if you will. And it starts with your professional relationships, but it applies to your personal relationships as well. Okay. So that's it for this. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to leave a comment down below with a link to my 3-part active listening masterclass. It's going to dive deep into the first part of this, which is really understanding why you're being reactive and what to do about it. Then it's going to teach you the second part in my 3-step process, which is really knowing what to do to show that you're listening, right? The facial expressions, the body language, all that good stuff. And then the third part, once you understand how you are showing up, is really learning to pay attention to yourself, but also the other person, so that you can see how are they responding to what you're saying. Are they being reactive rather than responsive? Because it's possible you've triggered them in response. If you are not fully engaged, that can lead to them being disengaged, right? It is a two-way street. Communication is always, always, always a two-way street, including virtually, right? Just because you may be working from home and showing up on Zoom does not excuse you from good communication hygiene, we'll call it, good communication standards and practices, okay? So I hope everyone has a fantastic Friday. And for your biggest takeaway today is to start paying attention to how you are listening to others. And if you are not taking a moment to really process what was said, you are in a state of being reactive instead of being responsive. Okay. Awesome. Hi, Ashik. All right, everyone. Happy Friday. Have a great day. And as always, reach out to me if you have any questions afterwards. Take care. Bye.